Step away from the vehicle, now.
What's the problem, sir?
Whose car is this? Where'd you get it?
This is my car. The fob's acting up. My license and registration are inside because the doors won't unlock.
So you can't prove it?
Got it. You can prove it in 30 seconds. Run the plate.
Don't tell me how to do my job.
Verify.
Shut up, you're under arrest!
Officer Caleb Rourke moved fast, like he'd already decided how the story ended. He'd seen Jamal Carter walking through the shopping center parking lot toward a matte gray Lamborghini Urus. Expensive car. Black man. Jamal reached the driver door, pressed his key fob, and nothing happened. He pressed again. He checked the fob, then tried from a different angle, closer to the handle like most people do when a remote acts up. Rourke read that small struggle as a theft in progress. He pulled in hard, got out with his hand close to his holster, and started issuing commands for Jamal to step away from the vehicle. The tone said, "Suspect, not citizen." Shoppers nearby slowed down, heads turned. Phones came out the way they always do now. Jamal didn't panic. He didn't match Rourke's energy either. He explained that the key fob had gotten wet earlier and it wasn't responding. He told Rourke the car was his. He also explained the problem with proving it on the spot. His ID and registration were inside the locked vehicle. Rourke didn't treat that as a normal explanation. He treated it like a lie he'd heard before. Instead of doing what basic procedure allows, running the plate, Rourke stayed locked onto the same assumption. He kept Jamal away from the door, didn't let him try the manual key, didn't ask for a second form of verification, and didn't call for a supervisor to slow the situation down. Jamal asked for a simple check, run the plate, confirm the registered owner, verify the VIN if needed, anything that made this quick and clean. Rourke refused. A younger officer arrived during the escalation, Officer Lena Park. She watched the scene for a few seconds and suggested the obvious steps. Run the plate, contact the registered owner, and handle it like a possible misunderstanding until facts said otherwise. Rourke shut that down immediately. He wasn't interested in a plate check, and he wasn't interested in being corrected in front of witnesses. He kept pushing the same idea. Jamal looked like someone trying to get into a car that wasn't his, so that was enough for him. Then he made the decision that turned the whole encounter from aggressive to unlawful. Rourke arrested Jamal for attempted grand theft auto. He did it in the open, in front of people who hadn't seen anything except a guy pressing a key fob. Jamal stayed composed while being handcuffed, but the humiliation still landed. He repeated again that the car was his and that verification would clear it up within minutes. Rourke ignored that and took it a step further. He called for the Urus to be towed, treating it like evidence of a crime he hadn't proven. The tow request went through, and the vehicle got loaded up while Jamal sat in the back of a patrol car, still trying to get someone, anyone, to do the most basic verification. Rourke transported him to the station and started the booking process like he'd just solved a major case. What Rourke didn't know was that Jamal wasn't a random driver. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't a freak situation. The department had set this up as a controlled integrity test after months of racial profiling complaints tied to Rourke. Jamal worked compliance for the same department. His job included auditing stops, arrests, and evidence handling. The Urus had a hidden camera inside it for this test, and the whole point was to watch what Rourke did when assumptions met a chance to verify. Rourke had already shown his pattern. He chose suspicion first, and he treated verification like an inconvenience. Now the test moved into the next stage, and it wasn't going to get easier for him. At the station, Rourke acted like the hardest part was over. He had a body in a holding room and a report to write. That's how officers like him calm themselves down. Paper turns a bad decision into something that looks official. Jamal kept it simple. He repeated the same facts, same request, run the plate, confirm the registered owner. Check the tow record, and meet the car at impound if they had to. He didn't plead. He didn't rant. He pushed for verification because verification was the whole point. Rourke didn't want that check done. He booked Jamal an attempted grand theft auto anyway, and framed the evidence as behavior, pressing a fob, standing at a driver door. Unable to produce proof, he wrote it like Jamal's locked documents were some kind of trick instead of a normal reality when your keys stop working. Officer Lena Park showed up again while the paperwork started. She didn't have Rourke's rank, but she had enough sense to see where this was headed. She suggested again that they verify ownership before the case went any further. Plate and registration were fast. Dispatch could handle it. A supervisor could clear it. The whole thing could be corrected before it became a lawsuit. Rourke cut her off and told her to stay in her lane. His posture wasn't about safety anymore. It was about control. He'd already committed to the narrative in public. Now he needed the station to follow it. Jamal asked to speak to a supervisor. He asked for his property to be verified. He asked for a phone call connected to the registered owner because the registered owner was him. Everything he requested was normal, and nothing he requested required anyone to trust him. It only required someone to check. Rourke delayed, deflected, and kept working the case like checking would contaminate it. He told himself he'd do it later, after the report, after the tow, after the shift. That's a classic move when an officer senses he's wrong, but doesn't want to admit it while the moment is still hot. Hours passed. Jamal sat through the holding process while Rourke built a file around the same thin premise. The longer it went, the harder it would be for Rourke to back out without looking reckless. Tow records hit the system. The Urus landed at impound. That should have been the clean exit ramp for Rourke. Go there, open the vehicle properly, recover ID and registration, confirm ownership, document the misunderstanding, and release Jamal. Rourke chose a different path. He drove to the impound lot alone. That part mattered. If this was truly an honest investigation, he'd bring another officer or he'd coordinate with evidence staff. Instead, he went like someone who wanted privacy and speed. He checked in, presented himself as the arresting officer, and got access to the vehicle using department tools and impound cooperation. Once he got into the Urus, the proof sat exactly where Jamal said it would. Wallet, registration, clean, boring ownership documents that erased the entire basis for the arrest. Rourke stood there with a choice. He could take the documents back to the station, correct the arrest, and write it up as a misread situation. Embarrassing, sure, but fixable. A clean correction would have looked like accountability. He didn't do that. He removed the wallet and registration and kept them. He didn't log them. He didn't photograph them as part of his investigation. He didn't notify anyone that he'd confirmed ownership. He treated the proof like a problem that needed to disappear. Then he left the vehicle and returned to the station with the story already prepared. He claimed he found nothing that verified ownership. And that's where the case stopped being about bias and started being about intent. Back at the station, Jamal asked again whether anyone had checked the vehicle. Rourke told him it hadn't been verified. He kept the booking moving. He kept the report moving. He kept the charge alive. Jamal didn't argue with him. He didn't need to. He watched how far Rourke was willing to go to protect a wrong assumption. Because this wasn't just an arrest scenario. It was an integrity test. The Urus had a hidden camera positioned for exactly the stage, aimed to capture what happened if someone got inside and handled documents. That camera recorded Rourke's hands, the wallet, the registration, and the decision to remove them. The system also logged his access at impound. So now there were three things Rory Kite couldn't talk his way out of: the tow record, the access record, and the video. Jamal stayed in holding that night longer than he should have because Rourke wouldn't admit what he'd seen. The department's leadership stayed quiet on purpose because they needed the full picture. They needed to know whether Rourke would correct himself when facts showed up, or whether he'd manipulate the process to keep his original claim alive. Rourke had just given them the answer. Rourke came in the next day, believing he'd contained the damage. He'd already done the two things officers like him rely on when they know a stop went bad. He'd put Jamal in cuffs fast, and he'd locked his version of events into a report. Once that's done, the system tends to roll forward on momentum. People assume the arrest happened for a reason. Supervisors skim for obvious problems. Prosecutors trust that the officer didn't invent the facts. Rourke counted on all of that. He didn't realize the department had been watching him for months. The captain had a folder of complaints tied to Rourke. Not one dramatic incident, a pattern. Stops that started with vague suspicion. Searches that didn't match the facts. Charges that fell apart when anyone looked closely. People complaining they were treated like criminals first and humans second. Each time, it got softened into miscommunication or officer discretion. No one wanted to be the supervisor who called out a veteran and triggered union drama. So the captain authorized a controlled integrity test, not a stunt, a procedure, a way to get clear answers without waiting for the next bad stop to become a lawsuit. That's why Jamal was there. Jamal wasn't a civilian picked at random. He worked department compliance. His job was to audit stops, arrests, and evidence handling. He didn't just read reports. He checked whether the behavior matched the policies the department claimed to enforce. The Urus was registered to him. The camera inside wasn't hidden for entertainment. It was there to document what mattered. The moment an officer had the chance to verify ownership, and whether that officer chose truth or chose control. Rourke had already failed the first part in the parking lot. He saw Jamal struggling with a key fob and treated it like proof of theft. He didn't verify. He escalated. He arrested. He ordered the tow. Then he stayed stubborn at the station when a younger officer suggested the basic steps that would have fixed it quickly. That still could have been written off as a bad call. Then came impound. Rourke went there alone. He didn't coordinate with evidence staff. He didn't ask for a witness officer. He didn't treat it like a neutral verification process. He treated it like a private errand, something he could handle without anyone looking too closely. He accessed the vehicle using departmental authority. He got inside. He found the wallet and registration Jamal said were there. Clean proof. No ambiguity. Ownership tied to Jamal. Matching the plate, matching the vehicle. At that point, a reasonable officer would have done the boring fix. Document the verification, notify the supervisor, amend the report, release the detainee, and write up the reason for the initial suspicion without pretending it was stronger than it was. Rourke chose the opposite. He removed the wallet and registration and kept them out of the case record. No logging, no entry in evidence, no photo attached to the report, no call to the station saying ownership was confirmed. He took the proof and then returned as if he'd found nothing. That's the moment the situation stopped being about mistaken suspicion and became about intentional deception. Back at the station, he kept the booking moving. He kept repeating that Jamal couldn't prove the car was his. He kept treating Jamal's calm requests to verify as if they were part of a con. The longer it went, the more he needed everyone else to accept the story because backing out would expose what he'd done at impound. The department didn't intervene right away. That delay was part of the integrity test. They weren't looking for a quick correction. They were measuring decision-making under pressure and under pride. They needed to know what he did when the facts were sitting right in front of him. He chose to bury them. The next morning, the captain called him in. No casual check-in. No, walk me through it in a friendly tone. A direct summons. Rourke walked in expecting criticism. He didn't expect the room. Jamal sat inside already, not in cuffs, not treated as a detainee. Jamal didn't smirk. He didn't act triumphant. He looked like someone doing his job and letting the process speak for itself. The captain had Rourke explain the arrest from the beginning. Rourke stayed confident. He framed the parking lot behavior as criminal. He emphasized Jamal's inability to produce documents right there, twisting the locked car problem into suspicious failure to identify. He talked like decisiveness was the same as correctness. The captain then narrowed it down to the only point that mattered: impound access. Rourke confirmed he accessed the Urus. The captain asked what he recovered. Rourke stuck with the lie. He claimed he found nothing that proved ownership. The captain didn't argue and he didn't lecture. He played the footage. The video showed Rourke entering the vehicle, locating the wallet and registration, removing them, and leaving with them. Clear hands, clear items, clear choice. The camera didn't capture a misunderstanding, it captured a decision. Then the captain explained the part Rourke hadn't seen coming. Jamal worked compliance. This was a controlled test. The camera was placed intentionally. The department ran it because Rourke had a history that couldn't be ignored anymore. Rourke tried to shift into justification. He tried to make it sound like procedure, like he was securing property, like he was protecting the scene. None of that explained why he returned and claimed he found nothing. None of that explained why Jamal stayed in custody while the proof sat in Rourke's possession. The captain ordered him to surrender his badge and weapon immediately. Rourke hesitated, then argued, not shouting but pushing. That tone officers use when they think rank or confidence can bend the room. The captain didn't budge. A supervisor stood by, while Rourke handed everything over. The captain ended his employment right there, with documentation prepared and witnesses present. Termination was only the start. The department notified investigators who weren't tied to Rourke's chain of command. They collected the missing wallet and registration. They preserved the impound footage. They pulled tow records and impound access logs to show he had been there and when. They pulled the body cam from the parking lot to capture the initial approach and escalation. They pulled station footage to show Jamal's repeated requests to verify and Rourke's refusals. They pulled dispatch audio to confirm whether any attempt to run the plate happened when it should have. The timeline aligned cleanly, and it looked worse each time they laid it out. He assumed theft without verification. He refused verification when it was offered. He found proof that he was wrong. He concealed that proof. He reported the opposite. Investigators didn't have to interpret his intent. His actions spelled it out. Rourke was arrested for false imprisonment, evidence tampering, filing a false report, and civil rights violations under color of law. Those weren't technical charges. They matched what he did. He used authority to detain someone without proper basis, then manipulated evidence and records to keep the detention from collapsing. The story went public quickly once the termination and arrest hit official channels. The public didn't need a long explanation. They saw the same simple picture. A black man got arrested near his own car because an officer decided he didn't belong near it, and when that officer found proof, he tried to make the proof disappear. That's why it spread. Once it did, the department couldn't pretend it was one bad day. Review teams pulled Rourke's history. They compared complaints to his reports, his stop data, and the outcomes of cases he initiated. They found more weak stops, more escalation, more situations where verification would have ended it but didn't. The review also highlighted leadership failures. Supervisors who ignored patterns, people who signed off on paperwork they should have challenged, a culture that treated citizen complaints like background noise. Some supervisors caught discipline. Some got removed from roles that required direct oversight. Policy changes followed because the department needed structural fixes, not just a scapegoat. At trial, Rourke tried to lean on the usual defense. He claimed he acted reasonably based on what he perceived in the parking lot. That argument collapsed at the same point every time. Impound. A jury can understand a mistake. They don't excuse hiding proof and lying in a report. The concealment wasn't a split-second decision. It was deliberate, it was quiet, and it was documented. The convictions followed. Jamal returned to his normal work after, and the department used the case in training. The lesson wasn't complicated, and it didn't need motivational speeches. Verify first. Slow down when the facts are easy to check. Don't turn a hunch into cuffs. If you're wrong, correct it immediately. The moment an officer starts protecting ego instead of truth, the job is already gone. Cameras, logs, and oversight don't care about someone's confidence. They care about what happened. Now, be honest. If you were Officer Park watching that arrest and hearing Jamal ask for verification, would you have pushed harder, documented it, or gone straight to a supervisor? Comment your answer, share the story with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real accountability stories told straight.
Turn around. Hands behind your back.
For what? Yeah,
Don't debate me. Turn around.
I'm not debating. I'm asking why you're searching me. I gave you my ID. I'm standing right here.
Racial profiling turned into a constitutional problem in a nearly empty supermarket in Cedar Ridge, Ohio, when Officer Trent Callahan walked up on Daniel Brooks in the dairy aisle and treated a routine grocery run like a criminal investigation. Callahan approached with that controlled, predatory confidence some officers use when they think the space belongs to them. He positioned himself close enough to block Daniel's path and started asking questions that weren't casual or friendly. He claimed Daniel was acting suspicious, but he didn't explain what that meant in real terms. No report of theft, no call from the store, no specific accusation. Daniel didn't give him a reason to escalate. He kept his voice steady and his movements slow. He answered what he could, and when Callahan demanded identification, Daniel handed over a valid ID without argument. That should have been the end of it, especially after Callahan checked the information and found nothing that justified keeping Daniel there. Instead, Callahan stayed locked in. While Daniel stood waiting, the atmosphere around them shifted. A young shopper nearby noticed what was happening and started recording on her phone. Another customer slowed down at the end of the aisle, watching closely. The store itself was already recording too, with ceiling cameras covering the dairy section from multiple angles. Callahan either didn't notice or didn't care. He kept building pressure, trying to turn Daniel's calm into a problem. Right after checking the ID, Callahan changed the tone. He started describing Daniel's basic questions as defiance, as if asking why he was being stopped was the same thing as refusing orders. Then he gave a new command. Daniel needed to turn around and submit to a search. That was the moment it stopped looking like concern and started looking like control. Callahan still didn't name a crime. He didn't point to probable cause. He didn't explain what he believed Daniel had done. He just acted like the badge itself was enough to justify whatever he wanted next. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to walk away. He didn't swing the conversation into drama. He asked a simple question about the reason for the search, because that reason matters. Callahan treated that question like disrespect, and his posture got sharper. He spoke louder, not to communicate, but to dominate the space and signal to anyone watching that he was in charge. The phone stayed up. One witness moved slightly to keep the camera clear. Another customer started speaking up, challenging the situation openly, and calling out that Daniel had been cooperating the entire time. Callahan didn't back down. He doubled down. He repeated his vague justification, leaned closer, and ordered Daniel to comply again, this time with less patience and more threat in his voice. Daniel remained steady, but the tension was obvious now, because everyone could see what was coming next. An officer who couldn't justify his actions was about to force the situation anyway. And in that dairy aisle, under bright lights and multiple cameras, Callahan moved from harassment into physical escalation. Callahan didn't wait for a real legal reason to appear. He acted like his suspicion was enough. He stepped in closer, told Daniel to turn around again, and reached toward him as if the search had already been approved by someone higher than the Constitution. Daniel didn't jerk away or get loud. He stayed in place and kept his hands visible, because he understood the trap. If he flinched, Callahan would call it resistance. If he argued, Callahan would call it a threat. Daniel tried to keep it simple. He kept asking for the reason for the search, because that question matters and it's not aggressive. Callahan treated it like a challenge anyway. His voice rose, not because the store got dangerous, but because he wanted witnesses to hear orders and assume Daniel caused whatever happened next. The search started with grabbing. Callahan put hands on Daniel's arm and shoulder and turned him with unnecessary force, hard enough that Daniel's shopping items shifted and bumped the shelf. A couple cartons slid forward. Something hit the floor. The sound snapped heads around from the next aisle. Two things happened at once. Daniel tightened up because anyone would, but he didn't swing or shove back. At the same time, the witnesses got braver because the physical line had been crossed, and they could see it clearly. One customer told Callahan to stop putting hands on him like that. Another asked what crime Daniel was even being searched for. Callahan didn't answer the substance. He went straight to control language, warning people to back up and mind their business. Like being a public employee meant he could shut down public accountability. The phone stayed pointed at him. That mattered more than Callahan realized. A single angle can be argued. Multiple angles with consistent audio and calm behavior from Daniel, that's a different problem. It limits the officer's ability to rewrite the event later. Callahan kept the search going anyway. He ran his hands along Daniel's pockets and waistband area in a way that looked less like a quick safety check and more like punishment for not acting scared. Nothing came out of it. No weapon, no stolen items, no contraband, no reason to keep going. A normal officer would have stopped right there. Callahan didn't. He pushed Daniel again, this time with visible impatience, and pinned him into the edge of the cooler area like the physical dominance itself was the point. The grip marks showed fast. His hands weren't placed like careful procedure. They were placed like ownership. That's when an employee saw what was happening and moved quickly toward the front. She didn't try to intervene directly. She went to get the manager because she understood something important. The fastest way to break an officer's narrative control is to bring in someone with authority inside the store who can speak clearly on record. Miguel Alvarez, the manager, arrived within minutes. He didn't come in yelling. He came in focused. He took in the scene in one glance. Daniel standing controlled, Callahan too close and too physical, witnesses recording, items knocked loose near the shelf. Miguel didn't guess. He didn't ask Callahan if he needed anything. He went straight to accountability. Miguel stated that Daniel was welcome in the store and that no employee had reported Daniel as a problem. He also stated that the store had cameras covering the aisle and that the footage would be preserved. He said it clearly enough for the phones to capture and for the ceiling cameras to record the moment as it happened. That changed everything. Callahan couldn't rely on later paperwork to control the story if the manager was already on video contradicting his implied justification. He couldn't claim the store called him if the manager was saying the opposite on record. He couldn't claim Daniel was aggressive if the witnesses had been filming Daniel staying composed while being handled roughly. Callahan tried to regain control by shifting attention back onto Daniel, repeating that Daniel was being uncooperative and that the situation was about safety. Miguel didn't bite. He kept it fact-based and kept the focus on what could be proven. Daniel stayed calm through it, but the moment wasn't small anymore. It wasn't one officer and one shopper in an aisle. It was a public confrontation with multiple recordings and a store manager anchoring the timeline. Callahan now had a choice. He could end it and walk away with nothing, or he could keep escalating and create evidence that would follow him out of that store. And he chose wrong. Miguel's arrival removed Callahan's biggest advantage. No private hallway, no empty street corner, no, it's my word versus yours. The aisle had cameras overhead, phones at eye level, and a store manager on record stating there hadn't been any complaint. Callahan felt that shift and tried to overpower it. He started talking louder and faster, pushing his own version of the situation into the air as if volume could replace legal justification. He kept insisting Daniel was not cooperating, even though the entire sequence showed Daniel staying in place, keeping his hands visible, and answering what he could. Callahan's language wasn't aimed at Daniel anymore. It was aimed at the footage. He wanted a soundtrack that made force sound reasonable. Miguel didn't argue feelings. He stuck to facts. He repeated that Daniel hadn't caused a disturbance. He repeated that cameras covered the aisle. He made it clear the footage would be preserved and turned over if needed. He didn't say it as a threat. He said it like policy because that's what made it powerful. Witnesses took that as a permission to keep recording. The older customer stepped closer, not into Callahan's space, but close enough to make it obvious he wasn't backing down. The young woman filming adjusted her angle so Callahan couldn't block the view with his body. Another shopper at the end of the aisle started narrating what they were seeing out loud, keeping the timeline clean for the recording. Callahan tried switching tactics. He shifted from suspicious behavior to the usual fallback, officer safety. He acted like Daniel's calm questions created danger. He acted like the store needed him to take control. None of it matched what people were watching. Then his patience broke. He grabbed Daniel again, harder this time, and shoved him back into the cooler area. The movement jolted Daniel's shoulder and left a clear mark where Callahan's hand had been. A couple more items slid and hit the floor. That sound mattered because it made the force feel real to everyone nearby. Nobody could pretend this was routine after that. Miguel told Callahan to stop putting hands on a customer who wasn't resisting. Callahan snapped back at him and warned him to stay out of it. Miguel didn't move away. He didn't escalate either. He kept his position and kept repeating that the store's cameras had everything and that the footage would be saved immediately. Callahan realized he was boxed in by evidence. That's when the mask slipped. He stopped trying to justify the search and moved straight into dominance. He threatened arrest without clearly stating a lawful basis. He talked about obstruction, when the only thing happening was witnesses filming and a manager stating what the store observed. He tried to intimidate people into deleting footage. That part landed badly because it sounded exactly like what it was. An officer trying to control what would exist after he left. Daniel held steady through all of it. He didn't posture, he didn't plead, he didn't argue in circles. He focused on two things: staying safe and making sure the facts stayed clean. At a certain point, Daniel stopped engaging with Callahan's bait and started speaking in a way that made sense for the cameras and witnesses. He clearly communicated that he had provided ID, that no crime had been named, that the search found nothing, and that the use of force wasn't justified. Calm delivery. Simple sequence. No theatrics. The calm timeline did damage. Callahan couldn't turn Daniel into a threat if Daniel wouldn't act like one. He couldn't build a story about aggression when Daniel's voice stayed controlled and his body language stayed contained. Miguel then took the next step that really sealed it. He instructed an employee to preserve the footage immediately and to flag the relevant camera angles. He said it out loud so it would be captured on the witness recordings too. That wasn't just a managerial move. It was evidence preservation in real time, and Callahan knew it. Now there was no clean exit with the narrative intact. Callahan finally backed off physically, but he still tried to leave the scene with a threat hanging in the air. He told Daniel, in effect, that this wasn't over and that he could still make it a problem if he wanted to. That was the last attempt at control. Daniel didn't take the bait. He didn't trade threats. He didn't insult him. He ended it with a line that stayed focused on boundaries and law, not ego. He made it clear that force without cause doesn't become legal just because an officer insists it is. Callahan walked away angry. Daniel stayed standing, breathing steady with witnesses still filming, and Miguel already moving to lock down the footage. The confrontation ended in the aisle, but the consequences started right there too, because enough people had captured enough angles to make sure nobody could rewrite what happened later. By the time Callahan left the dairy aisle, the story already existed outside of his control. 3 separate phone videos captured the same timeline from different angles. The store's ceiling cameras covered the aisle from above. Miguel had an employee pull the exact time window and flag the footage so it couldn't accidentally disappear later. That one decision stopped the usual playbook before it even started. Daniel didn't hang around arguing after the officer stepped away. He did what experienced people do when they know the next part is paperwork, not talking. He took photos of the marks on his arm and shoulder while the redness was fresh and easy to see. He asked Miguel for the incident report number from the store side and made sure Miguel had his contact information. He also got witness names and numbers while they were still standing there, because people mean well and still vanish once real life kicks back in. Later that night, Daniel went to get checked out. Not for drama, for documentation. Medical notes don't care about police narratives. They care about what happened to a body. The first clip hit social media before midnight. It wasn't edited into something misleading. It didn't need to be. The raw footage showed an officer escalating after receiving valid ID, ordering a search without naming a specific crime, then getting physical when he didn't get instant submission. The audio mattered too. The witnesses weren't screaming. They were asking basic questions any reasonable person would ask. What's the reason? What's the crime? Why are you putting hands on him? The department put out a standard statement within a day. They tried to frame it as a routine contact, where the officer felt concern. That language didn't land because people had already watched the interaction. Routine doesn't look like shoving a calm shopper in a grocery aisle while a manager says there was no complaint. Public pressure forced the issue out into the open. The chief couldn't bury it with a quiet counseling session or a paid suspension that ended with everyone pretending nothing happened. Callahan got placed on administrative leave almost immediately. Then Daniel hired Aisha Grant. Aisha didn't build the case around feelings. She built it around structure, timeline, policies, department procedures, use of force standards, search and seizure rules. She secured every angle of video she could, not just the viral ones. She obtained the store footage through preservation requests and made sure it was authenticated. She interviewed the witnesses while their memories still matched the recordings. Then she did the part that departments hate most. She went backwards. She pulled Callahan's history, complaints, prior allegations, internal notes, patterns in how he described black men as suspicious, patterns in how his reports used vague language right before force happened, patterns in how supervisors minimized it. One complaint might get dismissed as unclear. A stack becomes a warning they chose to ignore. Once that pattern became part of the record, the story shifted from one bad night to a department let this keep happening. Prosecutors got involved faster than Cedar Ridge was used to. The video evidence made it hard to hide behind uncertainty. The witnesses made it hard to claim Daniel started it. Miguel made it hard to claim the store wanted Callahan there. The search finding nothing made it hard to claim the escalation was based on an actual threat. Charges followed that focused on what could be proven. Assault tied to the unnecessary physical handling, abuse of authority tied to the unlawful search and detention, and civil rights violations tied to the lack of legal justification and the way Callahan tried to punish compliance that didn't feel submissive enough. Callahan tried to defend it with the same phrases he used in the aisle: officer safety, suspicion, non-compliance. The courtroom didn't run on vibes. The recordings didn't support him. The timeline didn't support him. His own decisions didn't support him. The criminal case ended in a conviction and a prison sentence. The civil case hit next, and that's where the department's bigger exposure showed. Aisha argued not only that Callahan violated Daniel's rights, but that the department had warning signs and failed to act. Supervisors had the ability to intervene earlier and didn't. Training and oversight were treated like paperwork instead of protection. That negligence mattered. The settlement was large enough to make Cedar Ridge change its posture, not just its press releases. The department agreed to reforms that had real mechanics behind them: improved training on constitutional stops and searches, stronger reporting requirements, outside oversight on complaint investigations, and an early warning system to flag repeat complaint officers before they stack up years of damage. Then the final detail came out, and it landed with extra weight. Daniel Brooks wasn't just a shopper. He was a U.S. Marshal, a federal law enforcement professional, high-risk assignments, real training, real experience. He knew what lawful stops looked like. He also knew exactly what happened to him in that aisle wasn't lawful, and he handled it with the discipline to keep the evidence clean. That reveal didn't make the incident more serious because Daniel wore a badge in another part of his life. It made it more serious because it proved the point people already knew. If profiling can happen to a trained law enforcement officer buying groceries, it can happen to anyone. Bias doesn't pause for credentials. Cedar Ridge tried to move on after the reforms, but the story stuck because it had a simple lesson that people recognized immediately. Abuse of power survives when nobody can prove it. It falls apart when recordings, witnesses, and preserved footage lock the truth in place. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in that aisle, would you have filmed, spoken up, or stayed quiet? Drop your answer in the comments and share this story with someone who thinks accountability never happens. And if you want more real, grounded stories where power gets challenged and the truth holds up, like and subscribe.
Hey, stop. Come over here. Step off the porch and talk to me.
What's the reason? What happened?
I asked you to come here. Don't make this a thing.
I'm talking to you. I'm not stepping out unless you tell me what
We
you're
got a complaint. You don't look like you belong right here.
This is my home. What crime are you alleging? If I'm not detained, I'm ending the
Step outside
conversation.
now.
Racial profiling turned into a constitutional violation when patrol officer Kyle Mercer saw Andre Wallace, a black man doing yard work in an upscale neighborhood, decided he didn't look like he belonged, and approached his home as if Andre's presence needed permission. Mercer didn't come to ask questions or verify a call for service. He came to take control. He ordered Andre to step outside without explaining a lawful reason, and when Andre didn't comply, Mercer escalated the encounter into a forced threshold entry that the Ring camera captured with clear audio. What Mercer expected to be a quick intimidation check became an evidence-backed civil rights incident the moment he treated the front door like it wasn't protected by the Constitution. Before we jump in, tell me where you're watching from, state, city, or country. And if you like stories where people stay calm, hold their rights, and watch accountability catch up to power, hit like and subscribe, because this one shows exactly why cameras and composure change outcomes. Andre Wallace had moved into the neighborhood for the same reasons most families did: quiet streets, decent schools nearby, and a place that felt stable. He and his wife Tasha maintained their home. They knew the routine. People walked dogs. Landscaping crews rolled through. Homeowners waved from driveways. The neighborhood looked polished, but the social rules weren't always as clean as the lawns. On that afternoon, Andre was in his front yard handling basic yard work. Nothing out of the ordinary. No one was arguing. No one was running. The only shift in the environment came from a patrol car slowing down as it passed. Officer Kyle Mercer drove by once and stared longer than he needed to. He kept going, then circled back. That second pass wasn't subtle. He moved like he was confirming a suspicion he had already formed instead of observing a situation that required police involvement. Mercer parked and got out. His posture was the first warning. He walked up fast, direct, and squared up, like the outcome had already been decided. He didn't greet Andre like a resident. He approached him like a problem. Mercer's body language signaled that Andre's job was to comply first and explain later. Mercer ordered Andre to step toward him and come outside, away from the doorway area. He didn't clearly state why. He didn't reference a specific complaint. He didn't identify any crime. He treated the command itself as the justification. Andre didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult Mercer. He didn't posture back. He moved calmly toward his front door instead, not to flee, but to control the space and keep the interaction where the law was clearest. Andre stopped in the doorway. That doorway mattered. It wasn't just a physical boundary. It was the legal line between a public encounter and a protected home. Andre understood that, and his response showed it. He refused to step outside simply because Mercer wanted him to. He asked what the reason was, whether he was being detained, and what legal basis Mercer had for ordering him out. Andre also referenced the Fourth Amendment in plain terms. No warrant, no consent, no forced entry, no detention without a reason that could be explained and defended. Mercer didn't take the answer as a lawful boundary. He took it as a challenge. He leaned into authority language and pressure tactics. He framed Andre's refusal as uncooperative. He acted like officer safety required Andre to come outside, even though Andre was already standing still, in a doorway, hands visible, calm, and not threatening. Mercer tried to flip the roles so that Andre looked like the one escalating, even though Mercer was the one increasing intensity. Tasha Wallace heard it from inside and came into view behind Andre. She didn't come out to fight. She came out because she recognized the tone, and she understood what it could turn into. She stayed close enough to see everything and close enough for the microphone to pick up her voice. Her presence raised the stakes because now Mercer wasn't dealing with a lone person he could dominate with intimidation. He was being observed by someone who could later describe the encounter clearly, and the ring camera was already recording. Mercer stepped closer to the threshold. Andre held his position. Andre didn't insult him. Andre didn't step out. Andre didn't get baited into doing something that could be reframed as resistance. He kept repeating the same central point. Mercer had not given a lawful reason for a detention or an order to leave the home, and Andre did not consent to Mercer entering the house. At that stage, Mercer still had options. He could have explained a legitimate reason if one existed. He could have requested verification without demanding Andre step outside. He could have called a supervisor and slowed the situation down. He could have left. Instead, Mercer escalated physically. He crossed the threshold line and used force at the front door area in a way that immediately turned the encounter from questionable to clearly unlawful. The ring camera captured the movement and the audio, and it captured the context leading up to it, which is what officers usually rely on to defend themselves later. Mercer didn't just make a bad call. He made it after Andre gave him clear warnings, and after Tasha became an active witness. Tasha reacted immediately and called out what she saw, making it clear she understood that Mercer was trying to enter without legal authority. She demanded the situation stop and pushed for a supervisor. Andre did the same. He stayed controlled and refused to be pulled into panic, because panic would have given Mercer a story to tell. Neighbors began paying attention. Some watched from windows. Some stepped onto porches. The neighborhood's quiet shifted into that familiar tension where people pretend they're not watching while still watching closely. Mercer kept pushing his narrative. Compliance first, explanation later. Andre kept refusing to accept that order without lawful basis. Andre's focus stayed on two things: the boundary of the home and the record being created. When supervisors arrived, the tone changed quickly. They didn't walk into a vague complaint with no context. They walked into a scene that already looked wrong. A homeowner in his doorway, a spouse behind him, a patrol officer keyed up at the threshold, and a ring camera directly capturing the whole interaction. Supervisors don't need a legal lecture to recognize liability when they see it. Andre proved ownership on the spot. He didn't argue about it. He produced documentation and identification in a straightforward way that removed any excuse for confusion. Then Andre disclosed the second fact that reshaped the entire response. Andre Wallace wasn't only the homeowner. He was a senior internal affairs supervisor with the county sheriff's office. That didn't make his rights more valid, but it changed how fast everyone understood the seriousness. Supervisors immediately recognized that Mercer had escalated on the wrong person, in the wrong place, with the wrong legal footing, and in front of a camera that would not bend to anyone's report writing. Mercer's posture shifted once he realized who Andre was. His confidence had been built on the assumption that Andre would fold, and when that assumption collapsed, Mercer had nothing solid to replace it with. Supervisors separated the parties and shut down the confrontation. Andre stayed in control of his home. Tasha stayed close. Mercer got pulled back. The interaction ended, but The consequences didn't. Andre and Tasha preserved the footage right away. They treated it like evidence, because that's what it was. The recording didn't rely on anyone's memory. It showed what happened in order, with clear audio, including Mercer's approach, his commands, Andre's refusal, and the moment Mercer crossed the threshold. By the time the department began trying to manage the situation internally, the key facts were already locked into video. The case wasn't going to hinge on who sounded more believable. It was going to hinge on what the camera captured. The department tried to keep it contained at first. That's what they always try to do when an officer creates a problem that doesn't come with an easy explanation. They logged the incident, collected initial statements, and put Mercer on a short leash while supervisors figured out what they were looking at. Andre didn't wait around for good intentions to turn into real action. He handled it like an investigator. He documented the timeline, saved the ring footage in multiple places, and made sure it couldn't accidentally disappear. He also wrote his complaint in a way that didn't invite word games. Dates, times, what Mercer ordered, what Mercer failed to articulate, when Mercer crossed the threshold, what force looked like at the doorway, what Tasha witnessed, what the camera captured. Tasha backed him up on the human side of it. She wasn't focused on policy language. She was focused on the basic truth. A police officer came to their home because Andre didn't look like he belonged. And when Andre didn't obey a baseless order, the officer tried to physically push the situation into a detention and entry. Tasha made sure the department understood they weren't dealing with a misunderstanding. They were dealing with a pattern of thinking. Internal Affairs opened a case quickly, and it didn't stay at the surface level. Investigators pulled dispatch logs to see if Mercer had a real call for service, a bolo, or any legitimate reason to initiate contact. They pulled Mercer's body camera footage. They interviewed the supervisors who arrived. They also started checking Mercer's prior contacts in that area because departments know one thing. If an officer behaves like that on a ring camera, it's rarely the first time he's tried it. Mercer's report became a problem almost immediately. When officers write reports after a confrontation, they often rely on vague phrases to justify escalation, suspicious behavior, refused commands, officer safety, aggressive demeanor. Those phrases can work when there's no video, because the public only sees the official narrative. Video changes that balance. The ring clip and the body cam made it harder for Mercer to hide behind broad wording, especially because Andre stayed calm, and the threshold entry was visible. The department placed Mercer on administrative leave while the investigation moved. That move wasn't a moral stance. It was risk management. They needed time, and they needed distance. Then the footage got out. It didn't spread because of a rumor. It spread because people could watch the entire sequence and hear it clearly. People saw an officer approach with a built-in assumption, issue commands without explaining legal grounds, escalate when challenged, and treat a private doorway like a space he could dominate. The clip also showed something else that always hits the public hard. Andre didn't do anything that justified the energy coming at him. He didn't run, he didn't threaten, he didn't mouth off. He stood in his doorway and asked for lawful reasons. Once it hit social media, the neighborhood context made it worse for the department. Upscale street, well-kept home, yard work, daylight. Everything that usually gets used to excuse police suspicion wasn't there. The only trigger was Andre himself. People reacted fast and loud. Comments weren't focused on technical legal terms. They focused on the obvious. Mercer approached Andre like he was trespassing in his own life. Then he tried to force compliance at the doorway. That's why the outrage stuck. It didn't require legal training to recognize it. Local activists started sharing the clip with context and timestamps. Community groups tagged city officials. Residents asked for Mercer's name and badge number. Some neighbors who had watched from a distance posted their own recordings from inside homes. adding angles that reinforced what the Ring camera already showed. People started asking how many other times Mercer had done something similar without a camera directly in front of him. The department released a public statement. It was the standard language. They were aware of the incident. They were reviewing. They took concerns seriously. They couldn't comment on an active investigation. It didn't calm anything down. If anything, it made people more impatient because the video didn't look complicated. Andre and Tasha didn't chase internet attention. They let the facts speak while their legal team moved. A civil rights attorney filed in federal court. The claims were direct and built around the video evidence: attempted unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion, unlawful entry at the home's threshold, use of force without legal justification, and retaliation for refusing a baseless command. The lawsuit also targeted the department's failures through supervision and training, because the goal wasn't only to punish one officer. It was to force the agency to answer for how a patrol officer felt comfortable doing that in the first place. Once the lawsuit became public, the department's internal process started moving faster. Command staff didn't want depositions that forced supervisors to explain why Mercer thought step outside was a lawful order without any stated reason. They didn't want a federal judge watching video of a threshold entry and asking why this officer wasn't immediately stopped. They also didn't want discovery digging through Mercer's prior stops and neighborhood contacts. The public pressure added another layer. City council meetings got louder. County officials wanted updates. The department's union started positioning for defense while also trying to avoid being tied to the worst parts of the footage. Mercer's world narrowed. He couldn't patrol. He couldn't pretend this was a minor complaint. He watched his name become searchable. He watched strangers learn where he worked. He watched friends and coworkers change how they spoke to him. Some supported him quietly. Others backed away because nobody wanted their own careers dragged into it. Investigators interviewed Mercer more than once. They gave him opportunities to explain himself. The problem was that the key decisions were already on camera. The question wasn't whether something happened. The question was why he did it, and whether his explanations matched the reality of what he'd done. Andre stayed consistent the entire time. He didn't play to the crowd. He stayed factual. He emphasized the legal line Mercer crossed and why that line exists. He also made it clear he wasn't filing because of hurt feelings. He filed because an officer can't treat a homeowner like a suspect based on appearance, then convert that bias into physical escalation at a front door. By the end of the first phase of the fallout, the department faced two problems they couldn't solve with messaging: clear video evidence and a federal case moving forward with public support. And Mercer was about to learn the difference between being protected by a system and being sacrificed by it. The department didn't wait for a jury. Once their lawyers reviewed the footage, the strategy shifted from defending Mercer to limiting damage. They saw the same thing the public saw, but they also saw the part that matters in federal court. Mercer didn't just talk too aggressively. He escalated without articulating a lawful basis. And the moment he crossed that threshold, he stepped into a category of misconduct that's hard to explain away. Negotiations moved fast. Andre's legal team didn't rely on emotion. They relied on sequence and standards. They laid out the contact from the first approach, the lack of reasonable suspicion, the repeated order to step outside, the refusal grounded in basic constitutional limits, and the physical entry attempt at the doorway. They also framed the bigger issue. Mercer's conduct wasn't an isolated lapse if the department's training and supervision allowed him to treat a homeowner like that in a routine setting. The department settled a large portion. They didn't do it to be generous. They did it to stop discovery from digging deeper and to avoid a trial where every decision would be played in slow motion for a jury. The settlement included compensation for Andre and Tasha and formal terms that forced policy-level changes. The department also pushed public messaging about reviewing training and reaffirming standards, because they needed to show the community they weren't ignoring it. But the settlement didn't end Mercer's exposure. The department's attorneys drew a line between institutional liability and personal misconduct. They handled the part that protected the agency, then left Mercer facing what wasn't covered. Andre's lawsuit pursued Mercer personally, for the remainder tied to his individual actions. That meant Mercer wasn't only dealing with administrative discipline. He was dealing with personal financial risks. That's when his life started collapsing in ways he couldn't control. Administrative leave became termination. Any chance of quietly transferring vanished because the video was too clear and too widely known. He started looking at decertification, which is career death in law enforcement. No certification, no badge. No badge, no steady paycheck. No steady paycheck. No way to keep up with legal costs that were rising every month. Mercer tried to fight it with the usual arguments. He framed it as split-second decisions. He leaned on officer safety. He claimed Andre was refusing commands. None of it solved the core problem. There was no lawful reason on record that justified what he did, and the doorway entry made it worse, not better. Then the criminal side landed. Prosecutors reviewed the same footage and the same reports. They didn't need a dramatic narrative. They needed elements that matched statutes. Unlawful entry, unlawful use of force. If Mercer's written account didn't align with the video, that opened another door for charges tied to false statements or misconduct in office, depending on how the case was built. Even if some charges were later reduced or negotiated, the process itself punished him. Court dates, attorney fees, loss of reputation, a permanent record trail. Mercer's finances broke first. Legal bills stacked. He burned savings. He borrowed. He sold things. The kind of backing people think officers always have didn't show up the way he expected, because support gets quiet when the evidence looks bad. He fell behind. Credit collapsed. Stress spilled into every part of his home life. His family felt it fast. His partner had to absorb the consequences of his choices without having made them. Arguments became routine. Plans got canceled. Stability disappeared. If they owned a home, the payments became a fight. If they rented, renewal became uncertain. Even basic things like keeping a car insured and maintained turned into pressure points. The badge had been his identity and his security, and once it was gone, the rest of his life had nothing solid under it. The department didn't protect him. They couldn't. They needed to show the public and the court that his actions violated training and policy. That's what agencies do when they're cornered. They isolate the officer, point to the manual, and claim he went off script. Mercer became the example that used to keep the institution standing. Meanwhile, Andre and Tasha didn't leave their neighborhood. They kept their routines. They stayed visible. They didn't shrink to make other people comfortable. They also didn't turn into internet celebrities chasing attention. They moved like people who knew the truth was already documented, and the system now had to respond to it. The reforms came in layers. Supervisors implemented stricter rules around knock-and-talk contacts. Officers had to articulate lawful reasons early, on camera, not later in a report. Training emphasized threshold limits and entry standards. Supervisors got clearer authority to intervene when an officer escalated without justification. The department also reviewed Mercer's prior contacts, because the community demanded to know whether this was a one-time incident or a pattern. Andre turned the footage into a training tool. He didn't use it to humiliate Mercer. He used it to show mechanics. He broke down the choices, the legal line at the doorway, the escalation pattern when a citizen asserts rights, and the way officers sometimes treat compliance as the only acceptable outcome. He made it practical. What to do differently, where to stop, when to call a supervisor, how to avoid turning bias into action. His message stayed consistent. Cameras don't create misconduct. They reveal it. And once it's revealed, outcomes change. That's the part a lot of people don't like to admit. Without the ring recording, Mercer's report could have shaped the entire narrative. With the recording, the narrative stayed attached to reality. In the end, Andre and Tasha kept their home, their dignity, and a record that forced accountability. Mercer lost his job, faced criminal consequences, and watched his finances and family stability collapse under the weight of choices he made in broad daylight, in front of a doorbell camera, over an assumption. Here's the moral that sticks. Authority isn't a license to invent suspicion, and just comply isn't a legal standard. Calm, boundaries, and documentation win against ego most of the time, because courts and investigators can't argue with clear evidence. What would you have done if an officer ordered you out of your own home with no lawful reason? Would you have stepped outside just to end it, or held the line like Andre did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more real accountability stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Step back from the drawer. Hands where I can see them.
Officer, what's wrong?
Shut up and do what I said. You don't get to question me.
He's on shift. He's the one who
Ma'am,
does
don't get
deposit.
involved.
It's literally our routine. Ask anyone here.
Look at the deposit log. Turn around. Put your hands behind.
A quiet June morning at Maple and Rye Bakery flipped fast when shift lead Caleb Marquez stood behind the counter, counting a cash drawer for a scheduled deposit, and his manager decided it looked like stealing. Trent Halpern called police without checking the schedule, without checking the camera feed, without asking the staff in the room. Officer Ryan Kessler arrived, keyed up, and treated the bakery like a crime scene. Basic verification never happened. Minutes later, Caleb stood in handcuffs while customers recorded and coworkers froze, scared to make it worse. Tell me where you're watching from, state or country. And if you watch stories about power getting exposed by simple facts, recordings, and accountability, hit like and subscribe. People only start filming when they feel the system won't slow down on its own. Now, back to the start. Maple and Rye ran on routine. Morning rush, regulars, espresso machine going, staff moving with muscle memory. The deposit process wasn't secret, it was scheduled. The drawer count happened in the open, logged, then sealed for a mid-morning bank run. Caleb was 19 and already a shift lead. Not a title they handed out for fun. He handled keys, counted registers, signed the log, and kept everything clean enough that nobody had to fix it later. That morning, he followed the same steps he always did. Drawer out, bills stacked, deposit slip ready. Trent walked in tense. That was normal for him, too. He liked control, and he hated seeing someone else touching money, even when policy said that person should be doing it. Instead of asking what Caleb was doing, Trent jumped straight to accusation. His voice rose enough that people at the front tables looked over. Caleb didn't match the volume. He kept his hands visible and explained he was counting for the scheduled deposit, that his name was on the posted schedule, and that he could show his employee ID right away. Trent didn't take the ID. He didn't look at the schedule. He didn't ask the nearest coworker who was watching this unfold. He pulled out his phone and called the police like he wanted the situation to harden into something official. That call set the tone. Officer Kessler arrived quickly and walked in with the posture of someone expecting a suspect, not confusion. He saw Caleb near the open drawer and locked onto it. The apron, the name tag, the way staff moved around him like he belonged there. None of it slowed the officer down. Caleb complied immediately with commands. No arguing, no sudden moves. He kept repeating the same request in plain language. Verify that he worked there. Check his ID. Check the posted schedule. Ask the staff. Pull the bakery's security footage. Kessler didn't do any of it. Trent positioned himself like the only reliable narrator in the room. He repeated the theft claim and leaned into the authority of the uniform. Meanwhile, a coworker tried to speak up and confirm Caleb's role. Another employee pointed toward the back where the camera system sat. Kessler shut that down and treated it like noise. Here's the thing. When an officer refuses to verify obvious facts that are right in front of them, the situation stops being about mistakes. It turns into choice. Kessler moved in, grabbed Caleb's wrists, and cuffed him behind the counter, tight enough that Caleb's shoulders tensed. Customers stared. Several lifted their phones and started recording from their seats and near the doorway because the escalation didn't match what they were seeing. Caleb didn't resist. He stayed controlled and kept repeating he was complying while asking again for the officer to confirm his employment and review the video that would clear him. Kessler ignored it and walked him out through the front entrance. That walkout did real damage. It wasn't just removal. It was humiliation in a public place, in front of people who'd seen Caleb working there before, in front of strangers who'd only remember cuffs. Trent watched from the doorway. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Just the posture of someone satisfied that the officer was doing the dirty work. Kessler put Caleb in the patrol car and drove him to the precinct without ever checking the schedule, the ID, or the footage. And that decision, skipping the simplest verification, was about to turn one manager's accusation into a case that would force every camera, every report, and every witness statement into the light. The patrol car ride didn't change the story Kessler committed to. He treated it like a simple chain. Manager accused, suspect detained, paperwork next. That's how bad arrests stay alive. Not because they're solid, because nobody slows down. At the precinct, Caleb walked in still cuffed, still calm, still repeating the same point he'd said in the bakery. He worked there and the cameras would show it. He didn't switch tones. He didn't beg. He stayed on facts. Kessler moved him through intake like the outcome was already decided. He talked to the desk, gave the basics of the accusation, and framed it as clean. Theft call, detained on scene, no mention of refusing to check ID, no mention of ignoring the posted schedule, no mention that multiple people offered to verify employment. That's the chess move right there. If you skip verification and write the report like you did it, you're building cover before anyone asks questions. Caleb asked to have his cuffs adjusted because they were tight. Kessler brushed it off. He asked again to show his ID and asked again for someone to pull the bakery video. Kessler didn't take the bait. He kept moving. Then Desk Sergeant Miguel Santos looked up. Santos had been at that desk long enough to read people fast. He didn't just see a kid in cuffs. He saw the details that didn't match the energy. The bakery apron still on, flour smudges, the way Caleb stood like someone used to being on shift instead of someone caught running. Santos asked the quick questions Kessler should have asked in the first 2 minutes. Where Caleb worked, why he had the drawer open, who else was there, and what exactly was verified before cuffs went on. Caleb answered in order. Shift led, scheduled deposit, posted schedule, security cameras, coworkers willing to confirm. He also pointed out that customers recorded the whole thing. Santos didn't accept Kessler's version on faith. He asked Kessler whether he checked ID or schedule or footage. Kessler defended the call by leaning on the manager's statement and the scene he walked into. That defense sounded routine, but it didn't sound responsible. Santos knew the difference. He had Caleb's property brought up for inventory because that's a normal step, and it put Caleb's identification in front of him without any drama. Name, date of birth, address, Marquez. That last name landed. Santos had seen it before, not on a suspect sheet. In the news and around the courthouse. Federal Judge Elena Marquez didn't keep a low profile in the legal community, and local law enforcement knew who sat on the federal bench in their area, even if they didn't socialize with them. Santos looked at Caleb again, then back at the ID, then at Kessler. The room shifted. Not because anyone suddenly cared more about right and wrong, because now there was a high chance someone with real power would demand receipts. Here's what mattered next. Santos didn't start making friendly calls. He didn't try to quietly undo it and pretend it never happened. He did the opposite. He started asking for documentation. He told Kessler to hold his body cam as evidence, not treat it like a personal file. He asked for the call notes. He asked whether the bakery footage had been requested. He asked for the names of employees on scene. Small steps, but those steps are how you stop a bad story from becoming the official story. Caleb requested a phone call. Santos allowed it. Caleb called his mother. Caleb. He didn't deliver it like some threat. He didn't lean on her title. He laid out what happened in plain order. Deposit count, accusation, refusal to verify, cuffs, public walkout, arrest. Judge Elena Marquez didn't respond like someone trying to rescue her son from consequences. She responded like someone hearing a constitutional problem with clean evidence attached to it. First move, preservation. She told him to write down names and times while it was fresh. She told him not to argue the facts with officers. Just keep repeating the verification points. Then she got counsel involved immediately, the kind of lawyer who didn't play for apologies. Within hours, formal preservation demands went out. Bodycam, dispatch audio, booking footage, store surveillance, witness contact info. Anything that could accidentally disappear once people realized how bad it looked. That move cornered everyone. Because now it wasn't just a kid saying he worked there. It was a paper trail forcing the department and the bakery to lock down evidence before anyone could reshape the story. Kessler still acted like he'd done nothing wrong. Trent still expected his call to be treated as gospel. Neither of them seemed to understand what was about to happen once the footage got reviewed frame by frame. Judge Elena Marquez didn't treat it like a family emergency. She treated it like a civil rights incident with a clock running, because evidence disappears when people get nervous. Her attorney moved first on preservation. Formal letters went out to the police department, the city, and the bakery. Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch audio, holding room video, booking area video, store surveillance, point of sale logs, the deposit log, employee schedule records. Anything tied to that morning locked down immediately. That move forced everyone to pick a lane, cooperate and produce, or stall and look guilty later. On the police side, the department couldn't pretend it was routine anymore. Internal review opened fast, not because they suddenly loved accountability, but because they understood exposure. Bodycam got flagged. Supervisors got involved. The city legal office got looped in. At the bakery, the owners got hit with the same reality. Their manager had called police on a shift lead in front of customers. Now lawyers wanted the footage and records. If they didn't preserve it, they'd be part of the problem. Caleb's case also hit the prosecutor's desk. The charge decision couldn't wait for vibes. It needed facts. That's where the verification issue came back like a boomerang, because Kessler had almost nothing besides Trent's accusation. Caleb got released later that day, not because anyone apologized, but because the case wasn't clean enough to hold him without questions. He left with a receipt for his property, red marks on his wrists, and a phone full of messages from coworkers and customers. People already knew. Video clips were already circulating. Here's what made this different from the usual online outrage cycle. This didn't stop at a post and some comments. A federal civil rights complaint got filed the same day, aimed at the officer's actions and the department's failures. The filing wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was leverage. It forced timelines, disclosures, and consequences. Once that paperwork landed, the department had to preserve everything and review it like it would be shown in court, because it would. Then the footage got pulled. Store cameras first. The bakery's angle showed Caleb doing what he said he was doing. He moved like someone working, not someone sneaking. He followed the deposit routine. Coworkers drifted in and out like it was normal. Nobody acted like they were watching a crime unfold until Trent decided it was a crime. The security video also showed what Trent didn't want seen. There was no frantic scramble, no attempt to pocket money, no hiding. It was a count, a logged task. Bodycam next. Kessler's camera caught the biggest problem. Caleb repeatedly offered verification options, and Kessler chose not to take them. Caleb tried to show identification. Caleb pointed out the posted schedule. Staff attempted to confirm his role. The camera system was visible. Kessler didn't check. That wasn't an accident. It was a decision. The body cam made that impossible to deny. The department compared Kessler's report language to what the camera captured. The gaps stood out. The report framed the scene as clear enough to justify immediate custody. The footage showed a workplace with multiple easy verification routes that got brushed aside. Witness statements stacked up behind the video. Customers described the moment as sudden and unnecessary. Coworkers described Caleb as the shift lead on duty. Several people described Trent as angry before police even arrived, already committed to treating it like theft instead of a workplace check. Then Trent's story started to crack. When investigators asked him basic timeline questions, his answers didn't line up with the store's records. The schedule contradicted his "he shouldn't have been there" angle. The deposit procedure contradicted his "nobody counts like that" angle. The camera contradicted his "I saw him taking it" angle. That's when the owners started asking their own questions, the ones they should have asked before a 911 call. Why did Trent jump straight to police? Why did he refuse to check internal records? Why did he push the officer to treat it like a crime in progress? Another issue surfaced during the records pull. Trent had problems of his own, not a vague personality problem. Operational issues, money handling issues, complaints, gaps that looked a lot like mismanagement and a lot less like a young employee suddenly deciding to rob the place in the middle of a shift. That mattered because it changed the motive. A false report isn't always confusion. Sometimes it's a shield. Sometimes it's a way to redirect attention. Kessler still had a choice at the start, and he still owned it. Trent's accusation didn't force Kessler to ignore ID, ignore the schedule, ignore the cameras, and ignore witnesses. Kessler did that on purpose. And once the department saw the footage, they had a second choice: admit the mistake and take the hit, or double down and risk turning one bad arrest into a career-ending scandal and a settlement. They didn't get to delay that decision for long, because the lawsuit had already started pulling everything into the open, and the evidence was already telling one story. Caleb acted like an employee doing his job, Trent acted like he needed someone blamed, and Kessler acted like verification was optional. Once investigators pulled the footage and lined it up with the reports, the department lost the ability to frame Caleb's arrest as a reasonable misunderstanding. The store cameras showed a normal deposit count happening in the open, with coworkers moving around Caleb like he belonged there because he did. The body cam captured him offering the fastest ways to clear it up: ID, schedule, coworkers, security video, while Officer Ryan Kessler brushed past every option and escalated anyway. Trent Halpern's accusation stopped looking like a good faith mistake the moment records and timestamps started contradicting him. Internal affairs didn't need speculation. They had a clean sequence of decisions. Kessler arrived, treating the scene like a crime in progress, accepted the manager's word as the only source worth hearing, ignored witnesses standing within arm's reach, and never made the basic check that would have ended the call. He cuffed a working employee, walked him out through the front in front of customers, then documented the incident in a way that didn't match what the cameras captured. That gap mattered because it wasn't a missed detail. It was the story he chose to lock in. The city's attorneys saw the same thing and understood the risk. A federal civil rights case with clear video doesn't turn on who sounds confident. It turns on what the officer refused to confirm when it was easy, immediate, and available. The department stopped treating Kessler as defensible. He was removed from patrol, his actions were formally sustained as violations of policy and judgment, and his credibility became unusable for prosecutions. That's how careers end in real life, quietly through files and decisions that follow an officer everywhere. Trent's side collapsed even faster because the bakery's own systems didn't support him. Once ownership got involved, they pulled the schedule, deposit procedure, and store logs, then compared them to his account. His version didn't fit. The security footage didn't show theft. It showed routine work. Under scrutiny, other problems around Trent's conduct and money handling choices surfaced in a way that made the original call look less like concern and more like control. He got terminated, and the bakery cut ties hard because keeping him would have meant accepting the legal and reputational damage he triggered. Caleb didn't walk away feeling saved. He walked away knowing he'd done everything people claim prevents escalation. Calm tone, compliance, clear requests to confirm facts, and it still didn't protect him until oversight got forced to look. The desk sergeant, recognizing the last name, Marquez, exposed something uncomfortable. The system moved faster once it realized the consequences could land in a courtroom with no room for excuses. Judge Elena Marquez didn't make private calls to smooth it over. She treated it like a constitutional issue and used the only language institutions reliably respond to: preservation demands, filings, and deadlines. The resolution followed that pressure. The city moved towards settlement because the evidence was ugly, the arrest was avoidable, and a trial would have broadcast every frame. The outcome included significant compensation for Caleb and attorney fees, but the lasting impact came from the changes attached to the case. The department tightened procedures around workplace theft calls, where the alleged suspect claimed employment, added requirements for supervisors when readily available video or workplace records existed, and strengthened rules that required officers to consider quick exculpatory checks before putting someone in custody. They also had to address restraint practices and documentation, because the footage made it clear how small choices stacked into a public violation. Maple and Rye didn't escape clean either. Regulars saw the walkout, staff saw how quickly a manager could weaponize police, and the business took the hit in trust. Ownership adjusted their cash and deposit procedures to reduce single-person vulnerability and made it explicit that internal verification came first. Schedule, Idaho, cameras, and a second staff confirmation before any police call. None of that fixed what happened to Caleb, but it reduced the odds the same play could happen again. The case became a public example for a reason. It showed how ego and bias can erase basic process, and how the minimum standards, check the ID, confirm the schedule, review the video, aren't optional just because someone in authority feels certain. Caleb didn't win because of status. He won because evidence got preserved before it could be buried, and because the recordings forced everyone to confront what they didn't want to admit. So here's the question to sit with. If the name Marquez hadn't been recognized at that desk, how long would it have taken for anyone to do the simplest checks? How many people never get that review because nobody with power demands it the same day? Drop in the comments what you would have done if you were Caleb. Would you have stayed controlled? Or would you have snapped once it was obvious nobody intended to confirm the truth? Share this with someone who still believes accountability automatically shows up on its own. And if you want more story times where recordings, oversight, and receipts force authority to answer for what it chose to do, subscribe.